said the single man is lost, that he's lonely, immature, or emotionally unavailable. They said if he doesn't hurry to find someone, he'll end up being left behind. But there's a truth no one had the courage to tell you. The longer a man walks alone, the stronger, clearer, and more dangerous he becomes. This isn't social failure. This is spiritual recalibration. The solitude everyone fears is exactly what forges a man who cannot be manipulated. Have you ever wondered why some men become more attractive over time, even without trying? Why they don't chase, yet they're followed? The answer lies in what society fears the most: silence. Not the silence of absence, but the silence of presence. The kind that forces you to hear yourself, to see yourself, to rebuild yourself. And in that place, a kind of masculinity is born that no crisis can shake. The kind of man who no longer needs to prove anything. In this video, you'll discover why solitude is not the absence of love, but the beginning of a new form of power. You'll understand why the most respected men in the world spent long periods alone, and how it forged them. You'll learn that if you feel out of place today, you might actually be on the right path. Because the man who finds himself alone is the same one that everyone eventually seeks out. They call it loneliness. But it's exactly in that space that the kind of man is born who one day will be impossible to ignore and painful to forget. Let's dive into the first aspect. The loneliness the world fears is the very thing that forges the man the world respects. Loneliness. Just hearing the word makes many people cringe. It sounds like punishment, rejection, fragility. But for the awakened man, it becomes the exact opposite, a field of power. Conscious solitude is different from involuntary isolation. It's a deliberate choice, a decision to step away from the noise and build something within. And the longer a man walks alone by choice, the more he transforms into someone who doesn't seek approval, he commands respect. And respect isn't begged for, it's earned through posture. It's in the silence of his own world that a man develops stoic maturity. He realizes that what used to irritate him no longer affects him. His ex is dating someone else? He feels it, but he's unshaken. Someone ignored him? He doesn't waste time, because he no longer measures his worth through the eyes of others. He's developed self-validation. And believe it or not, that's exactly what makes him magnetic. People can sense when a man is whole, when he doesn't need to be loved in order to be at peace. Solitude doesn't make him cold. On the contrary, it makes him selective. When he starts living on this frequency, he no longer enters any relationship just to fill a void. He prefers the void over the shallow. That's emotional detachment. One of the greatest superpowers a man can develop. He can love, but he doesn't cling out of fear. He connects by choice. And that flips the game. Because the more a man is enough for himself, the harder it is to manipulate him. The stronger his spirit becomes. The man who spends time alone gets used to hearing his own inner voice. And that voice begins to guide his actions. Without influence, without comparison, he walks with more firmness. He develops a kind of confidence that doesn't shout. It simply exists. He becomes rare. Because in a world starving for attention, a whole man is an anomaly. And that's the root of presence-based attraction. It's not about looks. It's not about money. It's about energy, posture. A man who doesn't need, but chooses. That's power. When you train your spirit in solitude, you start noticing things others miss. Small gestures, hidden intentions, what's said between the lines. That's masculine social intelligence, a sharpened emotional radar. And those who develop it start playing the game on a different level. Not because they manipulate, but because they understand. And those who understand don't fall for illusions. The man who has spent time alone has already faced his own demons. Now he sees others' demons with clarity. While the world races to have someone, this man is building a life that will make him undeniable. He develops high masculine energy, not through brute force, but through clarity, direction, and consistency. He doesn't chase what's unstable. He builds what's solid. There's nothing more attractive than that. And when he does engage in a relationship, it's on equal footing. Not to fill an emotional void, but to share a journey. He is whole, and he won't settle for less. That's when the world begins to notice his absence. The messages come back. People feel his void. The woman who let him go now watches him. And all without him lifting a finger. because the power of absence, when it comes from a grounded man, is overwhelming. He no longer needs to be present to be felt. His absence speaks for him. But there's a next level, something that begins to emerge once he finally understands what most men never will. Let's move on to the second aspect. A man's mind only sharpens when the noise of the world is replaced by inner silence. In a world that trains men to stay distracted, there's a rare kind of transformation that only happens in silence. And not just any silence, but inner silence. The kind that emerges when a man stops chasing approval, likes, or applause. That's where the refinement of mental clarity begins. The once restless mind begins to quiet down. And in that stillness, he starts seeing himself with more brutal and more honest eyes. Many confuse this with loneliness, but it's not. It's conscious solitude, chosen as a tool for growth. Picture a man who doesn't run from his own emptiness, but dives into it. While others try to cover it up with distractions, he stays. He stays with the discomfort. He stays with the silence. And there, he finds answers that the noisy world can't give. That choice isn't easy. It takes emotional self-mastery, because facing yourself without masks is raw. But that's what separates the average man from the evolving one. He doesn't avoid his inner mirror. He faces what he sees. In that solitary, yet fertile environment, masculine presence is born. Not the loud, performative kind that depends on outside validation, but the kind that holds weight even in silence. The type of man who walks into a room and no one knows why, but everyone feels it. That's silent value. He doesn't need to talk much. He doesn't need to prove anything, because he's already proven himself to himself. That's what true emotional independence looks like. He doesn't seek to please. He simply exists. Practically speaking, this silence can be cultivated through simple rituals. Waking up early and walking without your phone. Reading thought-provoking books like Meditations by Marcus Aurelius or Ego is the Enemy by Ryan Holiday. Sitting for 10 minutes, just listening to your own breath. It sounds small, but try it. That's where true ego recalibration happens. When you realize the biggest battle isn't with the outside world, but with the noise inside you. And when you win that, the game changes. Many men are stuck in cycles of neediness disguised as relationships. Not because of love, but because of fear of being alone. But the Stoic man understands. Being alone is spiritual training. It's where he sharpens his impulse control. It's where he learns that desire should not be the master. He might miss something, but he's not a slave to it. He feels, but he doesn't fold. That's the beginning of inner freedom. And freedom, my friend, is magnetic. Every day in solitude brings him closer to himself. He starts to understand his flaws, his patterns, his shadows. That's brutal self-knowledge. No fluff, no excuses, no empty motivational quotes, just raw truth. And that kind of truth transforms. Because when a man knows who he is truly, no one can emotionally manipulate him. He develops masculine social intelligence. He doesn't react impulsively. He observes, understands, and responds with intention. And when he returns to the social world, something has shifted. He's no longer the same. He speaks less, but says more. He holds eye contact. His assertive communication is sharp. He has high masculine energy, but he doesn't need to prove it. Women notice. So do men. And everyone can feel, this man is different. He's been absent for a while, but now he's back. And he's returned with a presence that unsettles anyone still living in distraction. Because the power of absence, when real, always makes noise when it returns. With that in mind, let's move on to the third aspect. The man who doesn't need to chase is the one everyone ends up following. There's a type of man who doesn't need to explain himself. He doesn't double text. He doesn't force his presence where it's not respected. And yet, he's remembered. This is a man guided by mental clarity and emotional self-mastery. He knows that chasing, most of the time, is just running away from yourself. So he stays, not out of pride, but out of wisdom. Because those who are always chasing rarely stop long enough to become someone worth chasing. This man built something inside himself that most people can't even name. It's a dense, almost tangible masculine presence. You've seen it before. The guy who walks into a room and everyone turns to look, but no one knows why. It's not about being loud or flashy. It's about energy. And that energy can't be faked. It's the result of solitude, of silence, of time spent facing himself, sharpening, rebuilding. It's a fusion of silent value and masculine social intelligence. He knows when to speak, and more importantly, when not to. Women feel it. They sense when they're in front of a man who isn't driven by need. And that's deeply intriguing, because the standard is different. Men trying to impress, to please, to be chosen. But this one, he's not reactive. He listens. He feels. He observes. His assertive communication is clear, firm, direct. He doesn't shout, but when he speaks, it lands. And believe me, this stirs something primal in the feminine instinct. Because there's something intensely magnetic about a man who knows exactly what he's doing, and why. Of course, this doesn't happen by accident. A man like this trained his spirit. He refused shortcuts. He stared into the void. And because of that, he developed impulse control. He doesn't act out of desperation. He acts with clarity. He can see an opportunity and still let it pass if it doesn't align with his values. He knows that emotional urgency is just a disguised enemy, and his time in solitude taught him that with surgical precision. That's not theory, that's earned wisdom. Over time, this man becomes a living filter. He doesn't fit into just any space, because he's created a frequency too high to tolerate toxic environments or immature people. That's inner freedom, the power to choose your environment instead of being chosen by it. He can be invited, but he doesn't accept everything. He can be surrounded, but he keeps the power of absence inside him, because even when he's present, he doesn't give himself to just anyone. He's selective, and that's rare. This kind of posture is often mistaken for arrogance, but anyone who sees deeper recognizes it as Stoic maturity. The silent certainty that time will prove him right. The man who waited, who stayed quiet, who focused on himself, begins to harvest unexpected rewards, respect, desire, invitations, and all of that without playing games. He's not gaming, he's living. And his life becomes so solid that even those who once ignored him start to wonder why he's doing so well. But he's not looking back. He's looking within. Because he's learned that the greatest conquest isn't a woman, a title, or applause. It's mastery over himself. And this quiet, relentless journey is just beginning. Because once he understands that, a whole new vision begins to unfold, revealing what truly separates the strong from the fragile. And with that, let's move on to the fourth aspect. A man's mission only reveals itself in the silence he has the courage to face. Few people talk about this, but there's a truth only men who've spent time alone discover. There's a kind of clarity that only shows up once the world stops influencing you. And that doesn't happen when you're surrounded. Life purpose, real purpose, doesn't scream. It whispers. And to hear that whisper, a man needs inner silence. That's why conscious solitude isn't a luxury. It's a necessity. It's the lab where purpose is revealed and noise dissolves. For a long time, men search for meaning outside themselves. Relationships, status, social validation, titles. But after enough time alone, he starts to realize most of that is distraction. That what really matters is found elsewhere, deeper, more subtle. That's when brutal self-knowledge begins. He starts confronting his wounds, inconsistencies, and inner saboteurs. Not to feel guilt, but to understand. And only a man who understands himself can move with direction. Here's the crazy part. That clarity doesn't come from answers. It comes from questions. Why do I exist? What am I building? What will I leave behind? Questions that might scare you, but they also set you free. And when he spends enough time with them, something starts to shift. He moves with more intention, with purpose. He stops engaging in empty relationships or soulless projects, and his high masculine energy begins to focus on what truly matters. A real-life example: the man who used to spend 3 hours a day trying to impress people online now spends that time studying philosophy, learning new skills, or designing a business that reflects his essence. He understands his energy is sacred. Wherever he places it, grows. That's the start of assertive communication with his own time. He starts saying no to everything that doesn't serve his mission. And that makes him stronger. He becomes the architect of his own existence. This process, however, makes a lot of people uncomfortable. Because when a man discovers his mission, he becomes uncontrollable. He's no longer manipulated by emotional scarcity. That's emotional independence. He's whole. And because of that, he becomes desirable. Not because he's searching, but because he's building. The world senses it and reacts. But he doesn't move based on reactions anymore. His compass is internal. His radar points to something higher. And that makes him dangerous, in the best way. At this stage, the man becomes an enigma. Those who know him feel he's different. Calmer. More certain. Harder to read. That's the power of absence in motion, even when he's physically present. Because now he doesn't engage in every conversation. He chooses. He observes. He acts strategically. And that stance was born from the Stoic maturity Solitude gave him. He no longer has anything to prove. He just lives his truth, and that unsettles anyone who lives on appearances. And the more he advances on this path, the more he realizes he doesn't need to be seen, he needs to be real. He understands that the respect of a few wise ones is worth more than the applause of 1,000 empty minds. And on that frequency, he begins to attract what truly matters. Because when a man aligns with his mission, he becomes a magnet. But what comes after that is even more powerful. That said, let's move on to the fifth and final aspect. The silence of a mature man is worth more than 1,000 words from a desperate one. There comes a point in a man's journey where speaking too much becomes wasteful. The man who has faced voluntary solitude, who's battled his own demons in the dark of his room, knows this. He no longer needs to explain himself. His energy speaks for him. That's the point where silence becomes a weapon. Not of war, but of protection. It's in that silence where true silent value lives. He's realized that presence is more powerful than performance, and what's real never needs to shout. That's the beauty of emotional self-mastery. While others panic, trying to control the uncontrollable or react desperately to small rejections, the Stoic man breathes. He doesn't need to win arguments. He needs to win over himself. That's impulse control in its purest form. He chooses silence, not out of weakness, but out of strength. Because he knows when he speaks, it's with intention. And when he's silent, it's because it's not worth his energy. He's learned that the world doesn't need to be convinced, it needs to be impacted. And impact doesn't come from excess, but from precision. A mature man's assertive communication is surgical. He looks people in the eye. He speaks slowly. He doesn't aim to please. And because of that, he's respected. It's the absence of neediness in his tone that makes him magnetic. Women pick up on this, and they wonder, what is it about him? The answer isn't external. It's the inner freedom only silence can offer. In everyday life, this shows up in small but powerful actions. He doesn't reply to messages out of impulse. He doesn't engage in heated arguments. He doesn't overshare. He chooses carefully where to invest his time, energy, and words. That level of selectivity is rare. And that's why it's powerful. He's built something inside that isn't for sale. He's become whole. And a whole man is intimidating. Because he doesn't need, he chooses. And that flips the entire dynamic. Over time, this man realizes that the less he talks, the more he hears. And the more he hears, the more he notices the unspoken. That's masculine social intelligence in action. He reads the room. He senses emotional silences. He detects hidden intentions within minutes. And when something doesn't align with his values, he leaves. No drama. No noise. Just distance. Because his time alone taught him one thing. Nothing is more valuable than his peace. Some call that coldness. But in truth, it's Stoic maturity. The man who's been lost once now guards his energy like gold. He won't throw his heart on the ground to be trampled. He's learned the power of absence, not as a tactic, but as a natural result of who he's become. He can love deeply, but never desperately. Because desperation lives in lack. And he doesn't live in lack anymore. He lives in the silent fullness of his own creation. And in that silent presence, people start to see him differently. They pay attention when he speaks. They wait for his opinion. And when he decides to act, no one sees it coming. Because the man who spent enough time in silence, observing and rebuilding from within, when he moves, he shifts the entire room. Now that you've seen what really happens when a man embraces solitude, the question is simple and direct. Will you keep trying to fit into a world that demands your surrender, or will you start building an inner world no one can control? Because in the end, you either grow stronger in silence or get lost in the noise of others. Think carefully. Are you ready to become the kind of man who stops chasing and starts being followed? Are you willing to trade the fear of absence for the presence of purpose? Or will you keep living in the shadow of external validation? If those questions make you uncomfortable, it's because something inside you is already waking up. Leave a comment below saying, "I'm building in silence." That's how I'll know you're part of this rare group of men who are choosing to grow, quietly, and even alone if necessary. Truly, thank you for watching until the end. Your attention is valuable, and if you made it this far, you're already steps ahead of most. Now, I humbly ask, like the video, share it with a friend who needs to hear this, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications, because here, you'll continue learning how to become a stronger, freer, and unshakable man.